Hi, I'm Julia. I'm 46, and this story still tightens my chest. I saved for months to give my mom a trip to Paris. I thought it would finally make her proud. Instead, she looked at the ticket and called me a horrible daughter, because it wasn't first class. That moment changed everything. Tell me where you're watching from, and subscribe for more family drama and emotional courage stories. I remember the exact night I clicked the purchase button. It was almost midnight, my kitchen light buzzing softly above the table. A half-cold cup of tea beside my laptop. My fingers hovered for a second before I committed. Paris. For my mother. I told myself this wasn't just a trip. This was a peace offering. Thank you. A chance to finally hear her say she was proud of me, without hesitation or correction. Saving for that ticket had not been easy. I work a regular office job, nothing fancy. I clip coupons, wait for sales, and say no to small comforts more often than I admit. For months, I picked up extra hours, skipped dinners out, and ignored my own tired reflection in the mirror. Every sacrifice felt lighter when I imagined my mom smiling, telling her friends what her daughter had done for her. My relationship with my mother has always been complicated, though I didn't have that word for it growing up. I just thought love was something you earned by trying harder. She wasn't cruel. She wasn't loud. Her disappointment was quiet, sharp, and constant. A sigh instead of praise. Pause before saying thank you. I learned early that approval came in short supply and vanished quickly. Paris felt different. It felt big enough to finally tip the scales. My mother had talked about it for years, usually while watching travel shows or flipping through magazines at the dentist's office. I always wanted to see the Eiffel Tower, she'd say, staring at the screen like it was a window she'd never get to open. Every time she said it, something in me tightened. So I planned carefully. I researched flights, checked dates, made sure the timing worked around her doctor appointments and my work schedule. I chose a decent airline, safe connections, reasonable seats. I wasn't trying to be cheap. I was trying to be responsible. Coach class but comfortable. Clean. Respectable. I told myself love wasn't measured by legroom. When the confirmation email arrived, I sat back and let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. I stared at the screen longer than necessary, rereading the details. Her name. Her passport number. Paris. I imagined calling her, hearing the surprise in her voice. I imagined her telling me I didn't need to do all this, even though I knew she wouldn't mean it. Before I called her, I rehearsed the conversation in my head. Not word for word, but feeling for feeling. I pictured her laugh, the softer one she used when she was genuinely touched. I pictured myself standing a little straighter afterward, like I had finally done something right. There were moments of doubt. Small ones. Like when my car needed new brakes, or when my friend asked why I didn't just take a vacation for myself. I brushed those thoughts away. This mattered more. This was family. This was history. I wrapped the news carefully like a fragile gift. I didn't just blurt it out. I waited until Sunday afternoon, when she was usually relaxed, sitting by the window with her crossword puzzle. I called her then, my heart beating faster than it should have. At first, she didn't understand what I was saying. "What do you mean, Paris?" she asked, suspicious, like happiness needed proof. When it finally landed, there was a pause. A long one. I held my breath, smiling into the phone. "Well," she said slowly, "that's something. Something. Not wonderful. Not thoughtful. Something." I told myself not to overthink it. She needed time. She always did. I filled the silence with details, dates, hotel area, how close it was to public transportation. I spoke faster, eager, hoping enthusiasm might be contagious. She asked practical questions. How long? What airline? When? I answered them all, still hopeful. This was normal, I told myself. She was just processing. After we hung up, I sat on my couch, staring at the blank television screen. I felt lighter and heavier at the same time. Like I'd placed a bet with my whole heart. That night, memories surfaced uninvited. Birthday cards that said, "You could have done better." Report cards where one be overshadowed for as. Holidays where my gifts were compared, quietly but clearly, to someone else's child. I pushed those memories aside. This was different. This was Paris. Over the next few days, I caught myself smiling at odd moments. In line at the grocery store. While folding laundry. I imagined my mother telling her bridge group. Imagined her saying my name with pride instead of reservation. I even allowed myself to imagine a future conversation. One where she'd say, "You really surprised me." That sentence felt like a prize I'd been chasing my whole life. I didn't know then that I was still playing the same game. That I had mistaken effort for connection, and generosity for acceptance. I didn't know that this gift, meant to heal something old, was about to expose it instead. All I knew was that I had given my best, and for once I believed it might finally be enough. I was still riding that thin line between hope and nerves when my phone rang 2 days later. I was at work, sitting at my desk, sorting emails with one hand and holding my coffee with the other. Her name lit up the screen. For a second my chest warmed. I thought maybe this was it. Maybe she had told someone. Maybe she was calling to say she'd been thinking about it and realized how much it meant. I answered quietly, pushing my chair back so my coworkers wouldn't hear. "Hi, Mom." Her voice was calm, almost too calm. "I was looking over the flight details you sent." That tone. Measured. Careful. The one she used when something wasn't right. "Okay," I said, smiling anyway, twisting the cord of my badge around my finger. There was a pause, long enough for my stomach to tighten. Then she said it. "These seats are coach." The word landed heavier than it should have. Coach. Like an accusation. "Yes," I replied. "That's what I booked." Another pause. This one felt sharper. "Julia," she said slowly, "I'm not sure you understand how long that flight is." I glanced around the office, suddenly aware of the hum of printers and low conversations. "I do," I said. "It's a long trip, but the airline is good." I checked. She let out a small laugh. Not amused. More like disbelief. People my age don't fly coach to Europe. Something shifted in me then. Not anger yet. Confusion. "Mom, it's a gift," I said carefully. "It's Paris." "And you couldn't pay for first class?" she asked. The question wasn't loud. Didn't need to be. It carried judgment all on its own. I felt my face grow warm. "I paid what I could," I said. "I thought." "Well," she interrupted, "I just think it says a lot." There it was. That familiar sting. Vague enough to hurt, specific enough to sink in. "Says what?" I asked, though I already knew. She sighed like I was exhausting her. "It says you didn't think this through. Or you didn't care how uncomfortable it would be for me." My fingers tightened around the phone. "That's not fair," I said. My voice sounded smaller than I wanted it to. "I cared a lot. This took months." "And still," she replied, "you chose the cheapest option." That word again. Cheapest. As if I'd grabbed a bargain seat on impulse instead of carefully planning every detail. I swallowed. "I'm not rich," I said quietly. "You know that." "Yes, but you're my daughter," she said. A daughter who wants to do something nice would have found a way. The room around me blurred. I could feel my heart beating in my ears. I lowered my voice further, almost a whisper. "I did find a way," I said. "This is the way I could afford." She didn't respond right away. When she did, her voice had cooled. "I'm embarrassed," she said. That word hit harder than anything else. Embarrassed. I repeated. "What am I supposed to tell people?" she continued. "That I'm flying across the ocean cramped in a tiny seat? At my age?" I closed my eyes. For a moment I wasn't in my office anymore. I was 13, standing in the kitchen while she critiqued the dress I'd picked for a school dance. Too plain. Too tight. Too something. Always something. I didn't realize this would be such a problem. I said, my throat tight. "Well, it is," she replied. "And honestly, Julia, this makes you look like a horrible daughter." The words sat there between us, heavy and undeniable. I felt something collapse inside my chest. Not loudly. Quietly. Like a shelf giving way under too much weight. "I'm at work," I said after a moment. "I can't talk about this right now." She huffed. "Fine. Think about what I said." The call ended. Just like that. I stared at my phone long after the screen went dark. My reflection stared back at me, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. I didn't recognize myself. I felt exposed, like she'd peeled something open and left it raw. I stood up and walked to the restroom, locking myself in a stall even though I didn't need to use it. I just needed to breathe. My hands were shaking. I pressed them against my knees, willing them to steady. Horrible daughter. The phrase echoed over and over, each time a little louder. I replayed the conversation in my head, searching for where I'd gone wrong. Maybe I should have explained more. Maybe I should have waited for a sale. Maybe I should have put it on a credit card. The excuses lined up automatically like they always did. Back at my desk, I couldn't focus. Words on the screen swam together. A coworker asked if I was okay, and I smiled, nodded, said I was just tired. It was easier than explaining the strange mix of shame and sadness pooling in my chest. That evening, I drove home in silence. No radio, no podcast, just the sound of the road and my own thoughts. I passed a billboard advertising luxury travel, wide seats, smiling couples, champagne glasses raised. I laughed softly to myself, a short, humorless sound. At home, I opened my laptop again. I stared at the booking page, the seat selection diagram glowing on the screen. I clicked through options I already knew I couldn't afford just to see the numbers. Each upgrade felt like a door slamming shut. I thought about calling her back, apologizing, explaining again. I even practiced what I'd say. I'm sorry you feel that way. I did my best. I love you. But something stopped me. A tiredness deeper than the moment. A feeling that I had been here before, just with different words. Instead, I poured myself a glass of water and sat at the kitchen table. The same place where I'd booked the trip days earlier. The buzz in the light sounded louder now. The room felt smaller. I thought about how excited I'd been. How proud. How sure this would be different. And I felt foolish for believing that effort alone could change old patterns. My phone buzzed with a message. Not from her. From a friend asking how the big surprise had gone. I stared at the text, unsure how to respond. I typed, deleted, typed again. Finally, I put the phone face down. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard her voice. Calm. Certain. Disappointed. I wondered how something meant to be generous could leave me feeling so small. By morning, the excitement I'd carried for days was gone. In its place sat a quiet heaviness. Not anger. Not yet. Just the sinking realization that no matter how far I went, or how much I gave, it might never land the way I hoped. And that thought stayed with me long after the phone call ended. That thought stayed with me the next morning, sitting quietly at the edge of my mind as I went through my routine. I brushed my teeth, packed my lunch, and tied my shoes, all on autopilot. Nothing felt dramatic. Nothing felt broken. And yet something had shifted. It felt like noticing a small crack in a wall you've leaned on your whole life, realizing it had always been there. On the drive to work, I replayed moments I hadn't thought about in years. Not big memories. Small ones. The kind that hide in corners. Standing in the hallway as a child, holding a drawing I'd made for my mother, waiting for her to look up from the stove. Hearing her say, "That's nice," without turning around. I remembered telling myself that next time I'd do better. At a red light, I caught myself gripping the steering wheel too tightly. My shoulders were tense, like I was bracing for something that wasn't coming. That's when it hit me. I had always been braced. Always ready to improve, adjust, explain. Even now, decades later, my first instinct wasn't anger. It was correction. What should I fix about myself this time? At work, I tried to focus, but my thoughts kept circling back. I noticed how easily I apologized to people for things that weren't my fault. Sorry for the delay. Sorry to bother you. Sorry. The word fell out of my mouth without effort. I wondered where I had learned that habit. During lunch, I sat alone in my car instead of the break room. The quiet felt safer. I thought about all the ways I had tried to earn love over the years. Good grades. Being responsible. Being agreeable. Picking up slack. Staying quiet when something hurt. I had treated affection like a reward system, not something freely given. I remembered a time in my 20s, when I bought my mother a new coat for winter. It was warm, practical, on sale. She'd held it up, frowned slightly, and said, "I don't usually wear this color." I'd returned it the next day and bought a different one, even though it cost more than I could afford. I told myself that's what caring looked like. Another memory surfaced. My wedding day. She had hugged me, stiff and brief, then whispered, "I hope you're sure." I spent half the reception worrying she was right. Even happiness felt conditional. That afternoon, my phone buzzed with a message from her. Just one line. "Have you thought about what we discussed?" No greeting. No warmth. My chest tightened, but something else rose with it. Awareness. I didn't respond right away. That alone felt new. On the way home, I stopped at the grocery store. I wandered the aisles without a list, noticing small things I usually rushed past. A woman laughing on the phone. A child insisting on cereal shaped like stars. Life happening simple and unremarkable. It struck me how little any of this had to do with approval, yet how full it looked. At home, I sat on the couch and let myself think without rushing to solve anything. I realized how often I'd measured my worth by someone else's reaction. How I'd mistaken silence for failure and criticism for guidance. I had called it love because I didn't know what else to call it. I thought about friends who showed up without keeping score. Who didn't need me to prove anything. They accepted me as I was, on my best days and my tired ones. I had never tried to earn their care. Simply existed. That contrast hurt more than the phone call. I picked up an old photo album from the shelf, one I hadn't opened in years. Page after page showed me smiling beside my mother, but I noticed something I'd never seen before. I was always angled toward her, leaning in, watching her face as if checking whether I was doing it right. I closed the album gently. Later that evening, I made dinner and burned the edges of the bread. Normally, I would have scolded myself, called it careless. This time I laughed. A small sound but real. No one was watching. No one was judging. Nothing bad happened. Before bed, I sat at the kitchen table again. The same chair. The same light. Only this time I didn't open my laptop. I didn't check flight details or prices. I thought about the little girl I used to be, standing in that hallway with her drawing. How she believed love was something she had to earn with better colors, cleaner lines, quieter hands. I wished I could tell her she was already enough. That night, I slept deeper than I had in days. When I woke, the heaviness was still there, but it felt different. Less like a weight and more like information. Something I could carry without it pressing me flat. I checked my phone in the morning. Another message from my mother, longer this time. She talked about comfort, about expectations, about how people notice these things. I read it once. Then again. I noticed how little it said about me, and how much it said about appearances. For the first time, I didn't feel the urge to explain myself. I made coffee and stood by the window watching the street wake up. A man walking his dog. A bus stopping at the corner. Ordinary moments moving forward without permission. I felt a quiet clarity settle in. I had spent my life trying to earn love by becoming smaller, quieter, more accommodating. I had confused effort with worth. And while that realization didn't fix everything, it changed where I stood. I wasn't broken. I wasn't careless. I wasn't a horrible daughter. I was just someone who had been measuring herself by the wrong scale for far too long. I was just someone who had been measuring herself by the wrong scale for far too long. That thought didn't leave me as the day went on. It sat with me while I washed dishes, while I folded laundry, while I stared at the unread message still glowing on my phone. For once I didn't rush to respond. The silence felt unfamiliar, like standing in a room without furniture, but it also felt honest. That evening my mother called again. I saw her name and felt the old reflex rise in my chest, the urge to brace, to prepare my reasons like a shield. I let the phone ring twice before answering. Not to be dramatic. Just to breathe. "Julia," she said without greeting. "I've been thinking." "I'm listening," I replied, surprised at how steady my voice sounded. She launched into a careful speech about expectations, about how people our age plan travel, about how she had assumed I'd want the best for her. I noticed she said people a lot. Not me. Not us. People. As if this was a rulebook I'd failed to study. Normally, I would have interrupted by now. I would have explained my budget, my job, my sacrifices. I would have tried to soften every sentence so it landed gently. This time I didn't. I let her finish. When she paused, waiting for my response, the quiet stretched. I could almost hear her expecting the familiar scramble. "I understand what you're saying," I said slowly. "But I'm not going to explain myself anymore." There it was. Plain. Calm. No apology attached. She laughed short and sharp. "So that's it." "That's it," I said. "You're being stubborn," she replied. "After everything I've done for you." I felt the familiar tug of guilt, but it didn't pull me under. "I'm not being stubborn," I said. "I'm being clear." Clear. That word felt solid in my mouth. She told me I was overreacting. She said I was making things bigger than they needed to be. She suggested I was tired, stressed, maybe taking things too personally. I listened. Not because I agreed, but because I didn't need to argue. I gave you a gift, I said. That's the truth. You don't have to like it. But I won't defend it. The line went quiet. Not disconnected. Just silent. I don't recognize you, she said finally. I know, I answered. After we hung up, my hands were shaking, but not from fear. From release. Like I'd been holding a heavy box for years and had finally set it down. Unsure if I was allowed to. The next few days were strange. Without constant explanations running through my head, my thoughts had more space. I noticed how often I'd narrated my life to an invisible judge, justifying choices no one had questioned. Why I lived where I did. Why I drove an older car. Why I didn't upgrade things that still worked. I stopped doing that. Not all at once, but enough to feel the difference. At work, a colleague asked if I wanted to join a project I usually avoided because it came with opinions and oversight. I said yes. Not to prove anything. Just because I wanted to. When feedback came, I listened without shrinking. When praise came, I accepted it without brushing it off. My mother sent another message. Longer. Sharper. She wrote about disappointment and respect, about how she'd never spoken to her own parents that way. I read it once, then set the phone down. I didn't reply that night. Or the next morning. Instead, I went for a walk around my neighborhood. The air was cool, the sidewalks familiar. I passed houses I'd walked by for years and noticed details I'd never really seen. A wind chime. A painted mailbox. Small choices made without explanation. At the park, I sat on a bench and watched people pass. An older woman walking slowly with a cane. A couple arguing quietly, then laughing. Life didn't pause for approval. It moved, messy and imperfect, forward. Later that afternoon, my sister called. She didn't waste time. Mom's upset, she said. She says you're shutting her out. I leaned against the counter, phone tucked between my shoulder and ear. I'm not shutting her out, I said. I'm just not justifying myself anymore. There was a pause. That's going to be hard for her. I know, I said. It was hard for me too. My sister sighed. I get it, she said softly. I really do. That mattered more than I expected. That night I sat at the kitchen table again, but this time I wasn't waiting for anything. I wrote a short list on a scrap of paper. Not goals. Boundaries. Things I would no longer explain. My finances. My choices. My worth. I thought about how often I'd mistaken explaining for connecting. As if the right words could bridge any gap. But some gaps weren't about understanding. They were about control. The next call came a few days later. My mother's voice sounded tired. Less sharp. So you're really not going to fix this? She asked. I'm not fixing anything, I said. Nothing is broken on my end. She inhaled, slow and deliberate. I don't like this, she said. I know, I replied. And for the first time that knowledge didn't feel like a failure. After we hung up, I didn't replay the conversation. I didn't second-guess my tone or rewrite my sentences in my head. I made dinner. I watched a show. I went to bed. In the following weeks, the urge to explain still surfaced sometimes, especially around her. Old habits don't vanish quietly. But each time I noticed it, I chose differently. I answered questions without defending. I stated plans without disclaimers. I let disappointment exist without trying to smooth it away. One afternoon, standing in line at the post office, I overheard a woman apologizing repeatedly to the clerk for things beyond her control. I felt a pang of recognition. I also felt gratitude that I was learning something new even this late. Stopping the explanations didn't make me colder. It made me lighter. Conversations felt shorter, clearer. I slept better. I laughed more easily. The constant hum of self-judgment faded into the background. My mother didn't suddenly change. She still hinted. She still sighed. But something between us had shifted. The space where I used to fill every silence with effort now stayed open. And in that space I finally stood still. The moment I stopped explaining myself wasn't loud. There was no speech, no dramatic exit. It was quiet. Ordinary. And it changed everything. The moment I stopped explaining myself didn't close the chapter of my life with my mother. It opened a different one I hadn't realized I'd been avoiding for decades. Sitting on my couch that evening, I felt a quiet but persistent energy. It wasn't loud. It didn't demand attention. It just whispered, "You can choose your own worth." I poured myself a cup of tea, the steam curling around my fingers, and stared out the window at the bare trees swaying in the winter wind. Outside, neighbors walked dogs bundled in scarves, kids kicked snow into piles. Ordinary life moving forward with or without permission. And in that ordinary moment, I realized something extraordinary. I didn't need my mother's approval to feel whole. The first small act of choice came the next morning. I decided to check the flight itinerary one last time. Not to see if I'd done something wrong, not to search for faults, but to visualize the gift for myself. I imagined her arriving in Paris, seeing the streets, the cafes, the riverboats gliding along the Seine. And for the first time I allowed myself a sense of pride detached from her judgment. This gift was mine to give, not her opinion to dictate. Later that day I walked through the kitchen, my feet silent against the hardwood floor. I opened a drawer where I kept small keepsakes, postcards from trips I'd taken on my own, notes from friends, letters I'd saved from long ago. I touched each one lightly, remembering that every act of love I had offered, every effort to please, every moment I tried too hard, had not been meaningless. Even when unacknowledged, it had value. I had value. It wasn't easy. Some days the old guilt crept back, like a shadow in the corner of the room. She would text, brief and pointed, asking questions about the trip. At first I felt the urge to answer, to justify my choices. But I caught myself mid-breath. I reminded myself, I am enough. Her dissatisfaction does not erase my intention. Her judgment does not define my worth. And each time I repeated it, the phrase grew heavier, firmer, like a stone forming in my chest, grounding me. I began to test this new way of living in small ways. I let myself say no when a friend asked for help I couldn't give without guilt. I accepted compliments at work without brushing them aside. I ordered the expensive coffee at the cafe because I wanted it, not because I felt I owed anyone justification. Each small choice built a layer of confidence, an armor made not of deflection or explanation, but of simple self-recognition. One afternoon I went to the park and sat on a bench sipping my tea. A mother and daughter walked by, laughing over something trivial. I caught myself imagining my younger self sitting beside them, and I felt a pang of sorrow and relief at the same time. Sorrow for all the years spent bending, shaping, and apologizing. Relief that the bending had ended, that I was finally standing tall, even if alone. The following week, I faced another test of this newfound self-worth. My mother called again, asking about the flight seats, questioning the hotel choice, pointing out ways I could have done better. The reflex to explain surged, but I held it back. I spoke in short, factual sentences. I gave no justifications, no arguments. And something remarkable happened. The conversation ended sooner than usual. There was no victory for her judgment, no collapse for me, just clarity. Afterwards, I allowed myself a small celebration. I cooked a simple dinner, lighting a candle I hadn't used in years, letting its soft glow fill the kitchen. I didn't think about how it would appear to anyone else. I didn't consider whether it was good enough by someone else's standard. I just allowed myself to enjoy the warmth, the scent, the quiet sense of having claimed something for myself. In the days that followed, I noticed changes beyond the obvious. I stopped apologizing for minor mistakes at work. I let a friend see my apartment without rearranging or tidying obsessively. I let myself feel joy without anticipating critique. I realized that living for myself didn't mean living against her. It meant living honestly, with boundaries I had finally accepted. One evening while walking home from the grocery store, I passed a young woman sitting on the curb, tears streaking her face. I paused, unsure whether to intervene. She looked up, startled, and I simply offered a small, empathetic smile. She nodded and wiped her face. In that moment, I realized something important. We all carry invisible burdens, and sometimes the first act of courage is simply acknowledging your own. Choosing to be enough for myself made it easier to recognize and respect the struggles of others. That night, I sat with my journal, pen in hand. I wrote without thinking, letting memories and feelings flow freely. I wrote about childhood birthdays, small disappointments, moments of silent judgment, the endless drive to be good enough. And then I wrote about the gifts I had given myself. Standing my ground, claiming my decisions, accepting my feelings, honoring my own limits. I read the words back and felt a quiet affirmation settling over me. Each word was a promise to myself. I am enough. The Paris trip loomed, but it no longer carried the weight of approval. I visualized my mother walking along the Seine, sipping coffee at a street cafe, perhaps grumbling about the coach seats but also seeing the city through her own eyes. For the first time, I didn't tie my emotions to her experience. I could enjoy the thought of the trip without it reflecting on my worth. I had separated the gift from her judgment, and in that separation, I discovered freedom. I also noticed a change in how I communicated. Phone calls with friends became more honest. I expressed opinions without fear of being judged. I asked for help without shame. I allowed myself to pause in conversation, to listen, to be silent. I discovered that silence, unaccompanied by justification, could be enough. That was a revelation. There were moments, of course, when the old patterns tried to reassert themselves. A critical remark from my mother, a passing comparison, a subtle suggestion that I was doing too much or too little. But each time I returned to my mantra, I am enough. I didn't explain. I didn't argue. I simply acknowledged her words and let them pass, like leaves floating on a stream. I began to notice the beauty in ordinary moments. I made a cup of coffee and let the aroma fill the room. I lingered by the window to watch a sunset, noticing the way the light painted the snow in soft pinks and oranges. I listened to a favorite song without multitasking. Each act was small but cumulative. Each was a declaration. I am enough for myself. In the quiet of my apartment one evening, I reflected on the years I had spent bending and apologizing, adjusting and explaining, trying to fit a mold I didn't create. The realization was bittersweet. There was regret, yes, for the energy spent chasing approval that may never come. But there was also gratitude, for the lessons learned, for the resilience built, for the clarity gained. I could not rewrite the past, but I could inhabit my present fully. I shared my feelings with a close friend one night over the phone. It's like I finally stopped measuring my life by someone else's ruler, I said. She paused before replying. Julia, that's huge. That's freedom. I realized she was right. I had been free all along, but I had never recognized it. Claiming it, accepting it, made all the difference. Then came the day I packed her suitcase. I had chosen clothing, accessories, travel essentials, not as a way to impress her, but as a way to organize a thoughtful gift. I smiled quietly at myself as I zipped the bag, knowing that the love in this act was mine to give, not hers to validate. I felt pride and satisfaction without needing an external stamp of approval. The day she left for Paris, I watched from the doorway. She carried the suitcase, muttering about the cramped seats in the hotel room, and for the first time it didn't hurt. I didn't argue. I didn't defend. I simply waved goodbye. I had created a boundary in my heart. The gift was hers to receive, but it did not define me. In the following weeks, I continued small acts of self-affirmation. I reorganized my apartment in ways that made sense to me. I treated myself to a few things I had wanted for months. I spent time with friends who valued me without conditions. I allowed myself to rest without guilt. Each action reinforced the truth I had claimed. My worth was intrinsic, not contingent. Even the rare moments of doubt no longer triggered panic or desperation. If she called to criticize or compare, I listened calmly, acknowledged her perspective without internalizing it, and returned to my own center. The pattern that had defined my life, an endless cycle of seeking validation, was broken. I could finally inhabit my own space without permission. As winter turned to spring, I noticed subtle shifts in my demeanor. My posture felt lighter. My speech was more measured. My laugh sounded freer. I caught myself thinking of the past not with bitterness, but with understanding. I could see the little girl I once was, trying so hard to please and offer her compassion. That compassion wasn't for her mother, it was for me. By the time the Paris trip ended, I realized something profound. The city, the cafes, the riverboats, they had been wonderful, yes. But the real journey had occurred months before, inside my own mind and heart. Choosing to be enough for myself had been a journey of reclaiming energy, dignity, and emotional autonomy. And it stayed with me long after the souvenirs were unpacked, long after the photos were framed. I had learned the truth that I had long avoided. Love, respect, and pride do not require justification. They do not need negotiation or defense. I had discovered the quiet power of claiming myself, of saying I am enough and meaning it, even if no one else did. The world continued moving, ordinary and imperfect, but I now moved through it differently. I stopped bending to expectations that weren't mine. I stopped apologizing for being alive. I stopped shrinking to make others comfortable. And in that stillness I found freedom, clarity, and peace, the kind that comes only when you finally accept yourself fully.